Just wait for it to start recording. It's a little bit slow today. And for those who've joined us, if you've got any questions along the way, please put your questions into the chat area. And that'll be any time you've got a question at all, put it in the chat area, and we'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end. But welcome everyone to National Ag Week and our Farmer Time sessions presented to you by Primary Industries Education Foundation. My name is Luciano Massidi. I'm the CEO of PIFA. Today we have a wonderful presentation from Jane Weatherley, the CEO of Integrity Systems, which is part of Meat and Livestock Australia, who is also a member of PIFA. So we're very fortunate to have Jane along today to talk about careers in agriculture and no doubt in the area of meat and livestock. So and thanks very much for the schools that are logging in today. Over to you, Jane.
Thanks so much, Luciano. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to present to you all today. So I'm coming to you from Bathurst in the central tablelands of New South Wales, and it's certainly freezing at the moment for this time of year. Certainly a great season though, if you're a farmer. So what I wanted to go through today is probably just starting with giving you some insights into my career path and my life as it is today, where there's a balance between our farms, my professional career and my family. I'm certainly not a full-time farmer as much as I'd like to be at the moment because I guess our family farms were a bit crowded at the time when I needed to make that decision. So I decided to forge off and have a career, but also stay very much involved in our family farms. So once I go through that aspects of it all, I'll forge more into my role as CEO of the Integrity Systems company and what we do, what we're all about, and then I'll loop back around with some of the key learnings from my career that we apply on farm, and finish off on why I am absolutely extremely passionate and proud of why I've forged a career in agriculture and why I think you all should too. So let's start with our farms because I guess it all starts and ends there from my perspective. I've very much always wanted to be a farmer. I've always wanted to work in agriculture. Certainly, there was no two ways about it. I was never interested in anything else. I grew up on Bruny Island, which is in the far southeast of Tasmania, on a beef breeding operation. I went to a school of 42 kids from kindergarten to grade 10, and then I headed to Hobart, where I did grades 11 and 12, and did a Bachelor of Agricultural Science and a PhD at the University of Tasmania. I worked at UTAS then for a couple of years, supporting myself through my PhD. Worked on projects, including ostrich nutrition during that time. After that, I then went to the Department of Primary Industries and worked as an extension officer for red meat producers. And in 2006 was when I headed off to the big smoke into Sydney to work for Meat and Livestock Australia in 2006. I guess from getting to Meat and Livestock Australia, certainly where I've been ever since, apart from a brief year in 2011, where I left and went to work for Rabobank in the banking sector for a year. But then I came back to Meat and Livestock Australia, where I've worked in areas of research and development and extension, genetics with Meat Standards Australia and the Meat Eating Quality Program, and now Integrity Systems. I started as a project officer and basically moved my way up the ranks within Meat and Livestock Australia over the years. And I've been on the senior executive with Meat and Livestock Australia now for 8 years, 5 of those as CEO of ISC. I moved to Bathurst, or 50 kilometres out of Bathurst, 4 years ago. And now with my husband, we have 2 farms. Our main focus is lucerne and fodder production. For the last 2 seasons, we've also had a crack at growing pumpkins. So last year we grew 100 tonnes or so of pumpkins for the Sydney market. We also grow crossbred sheep as well, and where we sell most of the lambs is in the store market, and we also trade cattle. All 3 farms that we have, so I include the one in Tassie because I'm still very much involved in that, are exceptionally beautiful parts of the world. So very fortunate. Interestingly, they both have very similar climates. Although in the Central Tablelands, the main difference would be that the summers are probably a bit warmer. Our biodiversity is vast and is a particular focus area for us. And in particular, where we are in the Central Tablelands, we were lucky enough to have koalas within our biodiversity mix at certain times of the year. I guess continuing on with all of that, my family is certainly my absolute universe. My husband, Brendan, he does the lion's share of the farming operations. I have a 15-year-old stepson, and then there's little Tom, who's 3. So with the family, there's also an abundance of chooks and pigs, 7 dogs, potties, so potty lambs, ponies. So it's very hectic. It's very hectic on a daily basis in our household. Certainly to keep them all fed, watered, and happy. Also, I guess outside of all of that, other things that I love to do is travel when there isn't a global pandemic on. Obviously, I particularly love cross-country mountain biking overseas. So these are pictures from South Africa, and I also quite enjoy some hunting, but hunting with a purpose. And this particular picture here is a wildebeest that was donated to a local village for food. So let's now just delve into my professional career and what my main focus is during the week. So as I mentioned, I've worked for Meat and Livestock Australia for quite a proportion of my career. Meat and Livestock Australia is a research and development corporation, so the focus and investment is all on research and marketing activities that are funded through producer levies and also funding from the Australian government. The investments that MLA has aim to contribute to producer profitability, to sustainability, and global competitiveness. So the company that I manage is the Integrity Systems Company, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Meat and Livestock Australia, and we deliver Australia's red meat integrity system. And this system underpins consumer confidence in on-farm production of Australian red meat, covering on-farm assurance through our Livestock Production Assurance Program, and identification and traceability of livestock through the National Livestock Identification System. So why this is so important in terms of what we do in integrity systems. Our industry is essentially worth, at the moment, around $31 billion in meat sales. Our industry is large, it's important, and thousands of people depend on it depend on our industry for their livelihoods, for their food security, and their protein requirements. So a large part of the 31 billion is based on the fact that we have access to over 100 countries around the world because our systems are in place and meeting the requirements of our export countries. So if or when we get an outbreak of an exotic disease such as foot and mouth or a significant food safety incident, and we're not able to rapidly track and trace and contain it, it will be absolutely catastrophic to our industry, and markets would essentially shut down overnight and cost our billions, certainly in terms of trying to recover from that. So I guess our integrity programs that we manage are all about mitigating those risks and making sure that if there's ever an event, we're certainly covered and we're able to rapidly respond to those events to make sure that markets don't ever close and that our customers maintain the trust in the systems that we have. Just a little bit more now on the actual integrity systems themselves. So the Livestock Production Assurance Program is a voluntary program. We have around 170,000 producers across the country who are LPA accredited. For the National Livestock Identification System, our role is to administer the national database. And every year we would, I guess, coordinate and make sure that there's movements recorded for around 73 million animals, and currently we have around 242 million devices on record that we have in the system. The importance, I guess, of our investment, we need to be able to justify what we're returning to industry with regards to the levy investment, which on average is around $80 million a year. And we did a cost benefit analysis of that for 2015 and 2020. So that 5-year period found that for every dollar we invested, we got an industry return of around $7, which equated to about 500 million over that 5-year period. And those benefits are largely attributed to the fact that we're mitigating that potential risks and disease risks, but we're also generating the ability to have that market access and receiving price premiums as a result. Livestock Production Assurance Program is, again, it's a voluntary one, but it's extremely important because basically it outlines the key on-farm practices that indicate to our customers the integrity of the entire system. So when a producer is part of the program and is accredited, they basically are signing up to ensure that they carry out these 7 key elements within their business, and that's associated with making sure that they've done a property risk assessment and identifying any food safety or biosecurity risks on their farm and have a mitigation plan in place. Record keeping is a key element, so safe, responsible treatment of animals, and also making sure that stock foods, fodder crops, and grain, and any pasture treatments are recorded and tracked. We also make sure that element 4 is associated with making sure that all livestock is prepared and ready for transport, making sure that they're fit to load under the standards and guidelines. The 5th area is the livestock transaction and movement element, which is the documentation that's required to follow animals through the supply chain when they're sold. And the last 2 areas have been added in the last few years in terms of making sure that producers have a biosecurity plan in place and also are aligned with the animal welfare, so the national standards and guidelines associated with animal welfare. In terms of the National Livestock Identification System and what's required on farm there's 3 elements that enable lifetime traceability of animals. So the first is all livestock need to be identified by a visual or electronic ear tag. All properties need to be able to be identified through the use of a property identification code. And all livestock location data and movements have to be recorded on our national NLIS database, which we manage. The third element that we talked about that we're responsible for is the national vendor declarations, or the documentation that's required as part of the program. And essentially that document will bring together all on-farm assurance information, their identification and traceability details as well. So the LPA NVD captures food safety information on every animal, every time it moves from a property to property or to processors or to sale yards. And also, importantly, it provides evidence of the livestock history and the on-farm practices when transferring livestock through the value chain. So where we're moving, I guess, into bit of technology, one of our aspirations for the integrity program is to make it a lot easier for producers in particular to be able to engage and be part of the programs. So one of the obvious areas was to digitize the paper-based vendor declaration system, so the documents that are required to follow animals through the supply chain. And so we've turned that into an EMVD. That's generated so many benefits in terms of it being a lot faster and easier to use and a lot more accurate than paper. We update the NVDs quite frequently, so it's a lot easier to change an electronic version compared to reinstating a new version of the paper version. It certainly takes a lot less time for producers to complete it. Reduces a lot less time if we need to retrieve them for auditing purposes, and it's available at all times. There's no wait on waiting for books to arrive. For the integrity programs, we have quite a vision for how we want to really improve the system and transform it over time, utilising technology. So some of the technologies that we're starting to delve into are really to look at how we can take out the human element of the system so that producers in particular don't necessarily have to do a thing. So with some of the automatic real-time tracking devices that we're looking at, we're wanting to be able to find animals at any time in any place, to understand how many that there might be on farm, to be able to automatically track it when it's loaded onto a truck, and to be able to have that data when it's moved automatically uploaded into the NLIS database without producers having to log on to do any of that. So we're also looking at the automatic verification components, and with that, looking at alternative technologies for animal identification, one of which I'll talk about shortly. And we're also looking at with that, with traceability being one component of the data that we might want to be able to hold on a particular animal. We're also looking at how we can also retain all elements of data that we might have on a particular animal, and that can follow it through the supply chain. So, animal identification, as I mentioned, is one area that we're focusing on. The technology that's sort of emerging with regards to animal ID is really interesting, and there's a lot of interesting ear tags that are coming onto the market that will hold a whole host of animal health data, as well as track animals in real time. This one that we're looking at is actually looking at facial recognition using computer vision, and um, capturing data on animals that's unique to a particular animal. So with this technology, things like the head dimension, the distance between its eyes, facial colors and patterns, they're all picked up by the computer vision. Other elements and dimensions of the animal being picked up in terms of the different body dimensions, the surface convexity, hide color and patterns, as well as measurements with regards to different muscles within the animal. So looking at the distance between its head and tail, the stifle area, the loin and the back, its shoulder and brisket. They're all quite unique within each animal, and computer vision can pick that up. So I guess this is all being trialled at the moment, and I guess still got a ways to go. As you can imagine, uniform animals such as Angus breeds that are all black can be a little bit tricky for this type of technology, which is one of the challenges being worked through. But probably the biggest challenge at the moment is getting a really good picture. So getting an animal to stand still long enough for it to be able to capture the unique attributes. It's a good work in progress, though. So, in terms of what I've learned from my career, and that I certainly apply on farm at the moment, or have done for a long time, and a lot of them are practices that are probably old school, and well before came into fashion well before a lot of the audience were born. But things like whole farm planning, which was very big in the 90s, particularly, and getting a strategy together for your enterprise, we are certainly really big on, and record keeping. So I'm particularly passionate about data, and what data we can generate on farm about pretty much everything. So we have really good systems around all of that. Very passionate about rotational grazing and feed budgeting, and best practice grazing systems to really optimize getting the most out of the pastures that you have, but also looking after them at the same time. Genetics within our business and our breeding plans were a big focus. Not so much now, given the age of my parents, even though they're still not retired. They've sort of wound all that back a little bit, but we always had a big focus on 600-day growth rates. We also focused on calving weights, and temperament was the biggest focus, and certainly one area my mother was very focused on. So we do have the quietest Hereford herd, I think, in the universe, um, which is not a bad thing. In terms of our soils has also been a big focus, and certainly now that we're into forage crops quite a bit, we're all about no-till cropping. Very rarely do we turn over a bit of dirt. We make sure that stubble's used to really effectively and to help with build soil soil health. And biodiversity, I mentioned before about the koalas. I'm so fascinated about just understanding the environment that we're working in, what's actually there, understanding what precious elements are there that we need to be protecting, and making sure that we're doing a good job on all of that. And finally, I guess the a career in ag is one that's you know I'm fairly one-eyed about it, I guess, with regards to why I think it is the very best path to pursue. Certainly, statistics that get bandied around about the future requirements of food there's thousands of them. This one here, I guess the pertinent one is all about the fact that they're suspecting that by 2050 there'll be a 70% increase in global demand for food. So there's just going to be demand. It's just going to grow even more for people to be working in ag. Diversity was the biggest thing for me, I guess. Once I started doing ag science at the University of Tasmania, it became evident that agriculture wasn't necessarily just focusing on crops and cows and sheep and things. There's a host of avenues. I've got friends that are microbiologists that have worked on food packaging elements. They've worked in Antarctica because of their skills. Lots of researchers, lots of people that I know have become full-time farmers. So you can certainly take a career in ag anywhere. My career, I started out in extension. It certainly helping farmers was my passion and focus, but I've done a lot in research and development. The meat eating quality program is just getting bigger and bigger. Genetics is getting bigger and bigger. Banking and finance is, will always be incredibly important. And now I'm obviously focused on integrity system. So it's broad, it's diverse, and I would never in a million years have thought when I first started my career that I would end up CEO of an integrity systems company. I didn't start out certainly when the job was advertised. Didn't even think about advertising because I didn't think that it was really an area for me, and I didn't know anything about it much. And it was really my focus on data, my interest in data, and the fact that integrity programs are all about data that I was tapped on the shoulder to throw my hat in the ring for it. So it's one of those areas you just never know where you're going to end up. So I think that it's really worth pursuing. And I guess the third reason I was thinking about is that it's such an exciting place. Um, the farming these days is certainly very much in the hearts and minds of the generations coming through. Anyone who's on a farm, it's surprising if they don't want to pursue taking up the farm as their career. Um, the ag tech that's coming along now is just incredible. There's things like drones are now really considered mainstream. Once upon a time they weren't, but now they certainly are. And there's amazing things that can be done with drones. Automated autonomous vehicles is another one where that's just growing bigger and bigger. Where there's machines that can be driven from 100 kilometers away that are checking fences and doing various things. So it just blows your mind what's emerging. So I think just to finish off, my advice is that it's never too early to hook in a career in ag. If there's an area of interest, start engaging and start talking to people that are in that field. Um, Everyone that I would know always is interested in talking to people who are interested in a career in ag and how they can get a foot in the door. I encourage you to do work experience for any organisation that you think might be worth pursuing. The idea is that you get on people's radar, that they know you're interested in pursuing a career there. And once you start, from my perspective, it'll all fall into place. But the key is, from my perspective, is that you make every post a winner. You'll get opportunities put in front of you once you go down and start having a go at something. The main thing is that you make that opportunity. You give it a go, regardless of whether or not you think you can or can't do it, because someone obviously thinks that you can. So you may as well at least give it a try. If you want to be a farmer and not lucky enough to have been born into a large family empire, um, you still can do it. I've got a lot of friends who have done it, and I guess I'm sort of doing it in that way as well. But you can always set your career up, and you can always lease a bit of ground as a starting point, given that land prices are so ridiculous. You can also look at share farming arrangements as well. So there's lots of different ways to get into farming if you're not already in it. The farming game now, and agriculture more broadly, is certainly more exciting than what it's ever been. So from my perspective, it's certainly the best place to be. So thanks, Luciano.
Thanks, Jane. That was sensational, and it's a really good insight into your journey, but also the opportunities that exist currently. And I think one of the big things is that encouraging young people to get involved with careers in agriculture is really breaking down those stereotypes. So a lot of time I talk to young people, they think agriculture equals old man on a John Deere tractor ploughing up a paddock. And we know that's far from the truth in terms of what's happening today in so many different industries, especially where technology is leading the way in terms of farming becoming more efficient, and the science and of understanding animals and crops has really come a long way in the last few years. I wonder if we have any questions from any of our class